All right. Well, thanks for taking some time to chat with us.
Our pleasure.
And thanks for inviting me to your beautiful home here.
Yeah,
This is wonderful.
Yeah,
Merry Christmas to you, and Happy New Year to you as well.
You too.
Want to start with a couple of issues that are of interest to people where I'm from, in the Northwoods. So, as you know, Judge Robert Kinney, a former Oneida County judge, Rhinelander resident, resigned from the Ethics Commission here within the last couple of weeks, within the last month. He said there was too much secrecy and too little transparency on the Ethics Commission. You said you'd like to talk to him about it. Have you met with him? Would you still like to meet with him?
Absolutely. We made the offer to meet, and hopefully we will sometime after the start of the year. First, we heard about that in the letter, so maybe that's part of the secrecy. But certainly be interested in what his thoughts are.
Would you be open to using whatever sway you might have to potentially making changes on the Ethics Commission?
Depending on what they're looking at. I mean, I don't know exactly what his frustration is. I know a couple of the issues they had decided have been contentious, although the irony is they haven't been partisan. A couple of the issues that were the most contentious had a mix of Republicans and Democrats on one side and Republicans and Democrats on the other. So it's not a partisan issue. It may be something completely different.
Are you confident with the direction that the elections and ethics commissions are going in as a whole right now? Do you like what you're seeing?
Well, again, on the ethics part, it's still pretty early.
Fair.
I don't know, and I certainly have to hear what he said. On the election side, I mean, the elections went off without a hitch. If there was going to be anything that could have gone wrong, we would have seen it not just initially, but in the recount. And I think elections officials and clerks across the state showed, despite the fact that many were in the thick of, the clerks in particular, getting their property tax bills out and getting year-end stuff done, they handled the recount just fine. And so I think overall we won.
On a different issue that kind of affects us in northern Wisconsin, of course you championed a new iron ore mining law, streamlining that permitting process. You signed it in Rhinelander in 2013. Yeah, at Oldenburg, you bet. Many people said that might make it easier for Gogebic Taconite to potentially open a mine there. Of course, as you know, they scrapped those plans and pulled out their Hurley office back in 2015. At that time, Senator Tiffany said, well, the iron ore body will be mined at some point. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you look at this new administration, you know, part of the hang-up was a combination of the Army Corps of the Engineers, which really works hand in hand with the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA at the federal level. And you know, a lot of us felt they overstepped their bounds. And so, who knows? With a new administration, I'm not promising anything. I don't have any guarantees. But I think it is possible that they might give another look, whether it be to this project or something like that in the future.
Would you like to see a new company come in and explore
Absolutely.
there?
I mean, I was just in Iron County a week ago. I was in Ashland and Bayfield County a couple of days ago. You still look at a lot of those counties up there. While there's been progress over the last few years, they still could use a nice shot in the arm when it comes to the economy. And something like this would do that.
Iron County, as you noted, consistently has one of the highest unemployment rates in the state.
Right.
Say if a mine were to open, could those be long-term family-sustaining jobs?
Absolutely.
I think family-sustaining is given what miners generally get paid, but could they be long-term jobs as well?
At the time when we first announced our support for the bill, it was a couple of years back in one of our State of the State addresses, and I brought a bunch of unemployed carpenters,
I remember that.
miners, operating engineers, and others out there. And one of our points was, when you do something like this, it's not just family supporting. These indeed are generational. You're going to have people start working there, and their sons and daughters are probably going to work there, and maybe even their grandchildren someday, depending on their age, might work there, because it does have a long-term benefit that will support not just today's families, but families for generations.
Is your administration doing anything specifically to try to attract one of those mining companies or exploratory companies?
I think for us, the key would be, you know, it's the you know, is it the rabbit or the chicken or the egg? And in this case, I think for us, we'd have to see some changes, which we hope will come. You know, you've got new leadership that'll be forwarded. Attorney General Pruitt has to be approved by the U.S. Senate, obviously, first before he becomes the administrator of the EPA. But if you see the kind of changes which many of us believe will come with his leadership, and that transcends over to the Army Corps of Engineers, then I think we have something to show a would-be employer out there that, yes, things have changed, things are different. Otherwise, trying to attract them now probably just gets us to the same point we were before.
A tough sell to make without changes in federal regulations, is that what I'm hearing from you?
Yeah, because
Okay.
to them, for the time and investment that would take just to get into looking at the market, they need to know the prospects are likely, that if they do all the right things, and that's really all our bill did, was we changed the law not to say that they could automatically have a mine, but rather that if they took all these steps and they did what was required, then there wouldn't be things blocking it as they potentially had been in the past. And I think particularly when you look at this type of mining, it's some of the safest, some of the cleanest, some of the most environmentally sound in the world. And that would be our expectation, why we hold out hope, not just for the jobs, but that it can be done in a way that's environmentally sound.
Do the folks that live, say, on the Bad River Reservation downstream from there, do they have a valid point in being concerned about mining there?
Well, I think it's always interesting to listen to them, but again, I'd look at the process. I mean, we have examples already in this state of places. In fact, one of the most widely used places for people to try scuba diving in the state of Wisconsin is an old mine. It's been
Jackson County, yeah.
Right, it's been reclaimed. You've got other places that have done correctly, and that would be our expectation, would be that, that this would be done in a responsible way going forward, both for the economy, but also for the environment, and we think we can justify it.
I'm thinking back to, this will be the 4th legislative session you've not presided over, but been the governor for, coming up here in January. Near the beginning of each of those legislative sessions, there's been a fairly major conservative reform that's happened. 2011 Act 10, 2013, the mining reform law, 2015 right to work. Should Wisconsinites expect another one in this 4th legislative session, a major conservative reform?
I don't know, there'll be legislation. What I think is more likely to happen is our budget will include, we're continuing to look at some ways to reform things. Everything really with the overwhelming focus on how do we help build a broader workforce. You know, when I was running in 2010, it was all about jobs, jobs, jobs. Unemployment that year had peaked at 9.2%. Last month, we were at the highest level of jobs we've ever had in our state's history, over 3 million. We were at the unemployment rate at a 15-plus year low. Our percentage of people working is one of the highest in the country. So now it's not jobs, jobs, jobs. It's filling those jobs, jobs, jobs. And so we're going to look at things, whether it be on welfare reform, of doing things that even go further than we have already to put more people into the workforce, looking at changes we make even in more funding for public schools, but particularly to give them help with technical and career education, in our technical colleges, in our apprenticeship program, even in our UW system where I'm going to put more money. Much of the new money is going to be invested, tied into performance, to high demand areas. And so, yeah, there'll be changes even in terms of how we free up the marketplace so that people can start businesses without some of the barriers to licensing and things like that that have been barriers in the past. All those are things that we're looking at that's probably the biggest push will be in the budget as opposed to just a piece of legislation.
Sure. You brought up the jobs that you talked about right at the beginning of your term as governor, your first term as governor. You made the campaign pledge, and you and I have talked about it, the 250,000 jobs in your first term. Didn't meet that goal, didn't meet that pledge in the first term. Is that 250,000 number something you still track? Is that still on your radar?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We still do that, and we will all the way through the end of this term, and if we ran again, we'd run it, track going forward. But I would say what I've found in listening to people, the two big things that the concerns are, one, are filling more of those jobs, because one of the barriers to us adding even more jobs in the future is having enough quality people to fill the ones that are currently open. Case in point, just was in Clark County today. That's a good example of a county where I visited often, and any number of employers there have told me, we can't expand until we can fill the jobs we have, because if we can't fill the ones we currently have, we're not going to take on new ones and have those vacant as well. So having enough people in the workplace, adding to that, not just getting people trained, but plugging people into where these high demands in will help with workforce development. The other thing I hear a lot about is wages. So it's not just about creating more jobs, but making sure they're the kind of jobs that see wages go up. Mm-hmm. It's part of the reason why we put more emphasis on worker training and workforce development, and even a greater emphasis on more people in our technical colleges, because we've seen a lot of those high demand areas have greatly raised the average wage base here in the state of Wisconsin.
People in my part of the state keep a close eye on Lincoln Hills, and what's been going on in Lincoln Hills there in Lincoln County. You know, the state investigation, the federal investigation going on. If I read your comments right, you said that you haven't visited a prison in your tenure here as governor. Do you ever plan on visiting Lincoln Hills, and what could convince you to do that?
No, because to me, there's a difference between politicians go and do photo ops, which is what some of my critics are condemning you should do, is go take a picture, show you we're there, versus leaders put people in place who are well-trained and prepared to tackle handling those issues. And that's why I put nearly a year ago John Litcher in, who was well regarded by Democrats and Republicans alike. In fact, they went on record publicly in the media and said that, and charged him with not only dealing with the issues there at Lincoln Hills, but elsewhere, of saying, we want you to reform the criminal justice system in the Department of Corrections. And I think in the last year, he's done a significant job in doing just that. Now, he's not done, but I think if people look what's happened, I think a lot of the discussion are about things that happened several years ago, which are, legitimately need to be looked at. But I said last year when this came to light, when it was brought to our attention by then the Department of Justice at the state level, that one, we were going to take immediate action, and two, that we were going to work with them or anybody else to make sure that anyone, whether they were current or even if they went back 6 or 7 years before we were around, if there was anyone who was criminally responsible for actions that violated the law there, they should be prosecuted. We'd certainly be a party to helping assist doing that.
I agree with you that Secretary Litcher seems to be a professional in his job, and that he seems to be widely respected. At the same time, you're his boss. Is there no benefit to be gained from seeing firsthand, even if there's no photo op that goes with it, what's going on in some of these prisons?
No, again, to me, because what I found, a lot of these things, particularly early on when we met with the Department of Justice on this, we would have gotten in the way. They're trying to do an investigation, having somebody show up and have to deal with all the commotion that comes with a visit like that and the security changes, things of that nature, would have detracted from their intent, which was to get to the bottom of what may have happened, not just in the past couple of years, but potentially a decade or so before that. And it's, again, if it's about results, it's one thing. If it's about photo ops, it's something different. I tend to govern trying to figure it's most important to make sure you put the right people in and then let them do their jobs.
In a different subject on redistricting in the state. As you know, a group of federal judges ruled by a 2-to-1 margin that the current assembly maps are illegal, saying they unfairly advantaged Republicans by how the maps were drawn. One example that has been cited is that in 2012, Assembly GOP candidates got about 49% of the vote statewide, but took 61% of the seats in the state assembly. And even Judge Griesbach, who is the one dissenting vote in that decision, said, well, it's not illegal. There seems to be partisan intent there. Is the way we draw our maps fair in the state?
Sure. I mean, you elect people. You don't elect judges. You elect people to do that. And as long as people's constitutional rights aren't violated, for decades before this decision, the courts laid out criteria by which they expected the lines would be drawn for legislative districts. The reason the courts had to intervene was because you had a split legislature and you couldn't come to agreement, so ultimately the courts had to decide that because neither party could agree on the final map. The criteria they listed in the courts 10 years ago, 20 years ago, beyond, was met by the maps that the legislature passed several years ago, the maps that we currently live under out there. And Politics 101 tells you that just adding up all the numbers is a ridiculous argument because in Madison, some of these wards in Madison, actually Ralph Nader got more votes than George W. Bush. So there's going to be more Democrats in areas like that. But you can't splice it up here or, for example, in Milwaukee to be any more competitive in an area where a Democrat wins by 70, 80, 90% of the vote. So the number up and down that way is just a ridiculous argument. There are always going to be urban districts, and that's been the case all around the country, that are going to have high votes for one party versus another. There are going to be other places around the state, like the suburbs, that are going to probably be more likely to Republican, and the rest of the state's going to be largely competitive. If their argument held weight, the high water mark for Republicans should have been the 2012 election. And yet Republicans gained seats in 14, and they gained seats again in 16. To me, that completely wipes out the political argument, because if it was only because of those maps, they should have maximized their numbers. So how did they possibly win in the subsequent 2 elections? They won because they had good candidates and they had reforms that worked and people wanted more of them.
The way they do redistricting in Iowa generally gets pretty good reviews. It's a nonpartisan commission that does redistricting, and the politics, for the most part, are taken out. Politicians don't draw the maps. If a legislator were to propose something like that in Wisconsin, would you be willing to look at it? Would you be willing to support something like that?
Out there. But again, I think the arguments that were used here, I don't believe will be upheld in the U.S. Supreme Court. I think they're weak, even political, let alone legal arguments out there. And I believe the dissent clearly spelled that out. And in the end, like I said, if the argument is that it gave an unfair advantage, the only time that advantage should have kicked in was the 2012 election. But Republicans gained seats in the following 2 elections thereafter. And I think a lot of people say that's a whole lot of time and energy wasted on something when they should be focusing on how are we going to put more people to work and get them to training, not just to have jobs, but to have higher paying wage jobs than the ones they currently have.
You saw within the past day or so here, Representative Jarchow putting out a proposal to pretty radically change how the DNR is structured between wildlife and between regulation and many other areas of the DNR, and break it up and put it in different divisions. DNR just underwent a pretty big change in terms of structure. What do you think of his proposal to change it even more?
Well, the whole reason this came out is not because he proposed it, but because the Milwaukee Journal sent in a reporter, Jason Stein, to ask what I thought of the idea, and I said it was interesting, which I think it is interesting. Right? I'm not advocating for it. I'm not saying it's necessarily going to go in our budget, but I do think, unlike previous lawmakers talking about this idea where they just threw the idea out, to his credit, Representative Jarchow actually spent a fair amount of time and really researched and put together a plan that at least had some logic to it, whether you agree with it or not. I don't know that it's that far out of the mainstream, just in the sense that while it's different than what we've done here, a lot of other states do that right now. So the question is, are we out of whack compared to other states, or is his plan out of whack? I think to him it's open for debate that other states have things similar to what he's proposing out there. For us, you know, we're going to do our due diligence. People throw out interesting ideas all the time. That doesn't mean that we're going to jump to those, but I think we owe it to the taxpayers to at least consider ideas that people raise.
I want to be respectful of your time. I've got one more question for you, and it's in the Christmas spirit. You bring in folks and stores and shops from all over the state to decorate your place here. Talk a little bit about that, and specifically talk about the exterior decorations. Yeah, from in our neck of the woods, JJ's Acres.
Yeah. Well, it's a great deal. I mean, it's one of those where my wife and her friend Candy, who we call the first friend, tonight's the first lady, we call Candy the first friend, came up with this great idea back when we first came in about saying, you know, instead of just putting the same old things on the trees every year, why not have this kind of be a showcase to show off all the great different nurseries and florists across the state and rotate around. So every year, the Christmas Tree Growers Association donates a tree like the one I'm sitting in front of in each of the rooms. And then we bring in we rotate around, so it's not always the same groups, but different groups get a chance to come in, and they come in a day or so, I think it's the week before Thanksgiving, and they get to look at what they've got to work with. And then they come back, and in one day they do it all. And so out in the front, you see how spectacular it is. The entry was great. The rooms are all filled with great trees. It's just a nice way to show off Wisconsin. And I got to tell you, I should have done this years ago before I was governor. You don't have to decorate. You don't have to take down. It's like the best ever, and everybody loves your decorations.
You're always a winner.
Yeah.
Governor, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Christmas to you, too.
Appreciate it.